meeting of the Goffstown Planning Board. The agenda this evening is to receive public input on zoning amendments as proposed by the Goffstown Planning Board. Members of the board are
Brian Rose, the town planner.
Lowell Von Ruden.
Gayla Bruck, recording secretary.
Alan Dayton, Chair.
Barbara Griffin.
Collis Adams.
Tim Redmond, Vice Chair.
Earl Foley, alternate.
Welcome. Brian, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item on the agenda is a zoning amendment. Shall the town adopt amendment number 1 as proposed by the planning board, amending section 3.12, table of accessory uses, providing for the allowance of raising and keeping of livestock and raising and keeping of poultry as accessory uses to a principal residential use permitted by right in the conservation and agricultural districts and permitted by special exception in the R1 and R2 districts and not permitted in all other districts of the town, and amending section 5.5 agricultural and horticultural operations, giving specific rules and regulations regarding these uses on properties within the town. Just to start out, we've had several discussions on this previously, and the planning board has given comments, and the zoning board and the zoning administrator have taken those comments, and at the very last meeting of the ZBA, there were no comments to give back on any changes that were made per planning board comments. And so the proposed amendment is before you, and I'll stand here for any questions if you have any.
We'll start out with members of the board. Any members have any comments and inputs upon this article? We'll hold that into abatements. What we will do then is we'll open that up in the public hearing.
Actually, I have a comment.
Okay, excuse me, Barbara.
552, farm buildings shall not be located any closer than 100 feet to any district boundary of a residential district. My comment on that remains the same as it was when we met earlier on this. I'm not sure what happened at the ZBA after we discussed this, but I didn't understand why it would be more restrictive. I think they did change something, because I'm noticing that 552 is bolded, but I had an issue with it being closer. Has this taken care of it? Do you remember, Brian? I understand that they wanted to make it in regards to a residential district, which I don't particularly think should be applicable, because I think that's a new restriction, and I'm not sure why we need it.
Well,
Did it decrease it from 250?
this statement kind of is limited to any properties that are close to a residential district.
Right.
So it's not any and all properties, but it's only those that abut a residential district. So I thought that had been left alone, but the one that had been of concern was the 551, which I believe has changed now. That
Is that the one
that
that
farm buildings,
Okay.
that used to say farm buildings would be located no closer than 100 feet to any property line. And that was where I think the big concern was, because it restricted every property
Okay.
to that rule.
So that got taken care of. Thank you. Sorry for my misrecollection. Thank you.
Any other comments to the board? I'll open that discussion to the public on this particular article only at the moment. Yes, sir.
Hi, do you want me to come up to the?
Yes, sir.
All right. Jason Sachs, Blackbrook Road. I had a couple of comments about this. I'm sorry I missed the previous discussion by this board on the proposed amendment. If I understand it right, it's to expand the permitted uses table so that there's a new pair of lines for the accessory to principal residential use to allow raising and keeping of poultry by special exception. And the table of principal uses, as far as I can tell, hasn't changed. So it's really only this 312, lines 10 and 11 that are new, and I would support that. I had a couple of concerns, though, about the new section 5.5, and I think overall, I don't know, has this gone before Conservation Commission at all to comment? Because if it hasn't, I would kind of raise that as an effort that this is really, we don't have an agricultural commission in town, and not having that, really there should be some voice for farmers or other agricultural operations, similar to the fact that economic development can speak up for business owners. So I'm not a farmer, but I support agriculture in town, and I'd like to see somebody be involved in crafting such an amendment that would be familiar with the issues that are involved from the agricultural side, not just people that are, say, in residential neighborhoods and want this to be the zoning rules or not. As far as specifics, I looked at the proposed section 5.5. 5.5.2 about the 100 feet to a district boundary, as far as I can tell, is already in the existing zoning ordinance. So there's the existing section 5.5 reads, farm buildings shall be located no closer than 100 feet to any boundary of a residential district. So that looks like it doesn't change at all. As far as 5.5.1 goes, I would ask the board to consider removing that. I looked through the zoning ordinance, and the only land use category that I could find that had additional setbacks more strict than kind of general building setbacks was adult videos and theaters. So it seems weird to have only the adult theaters and agricultural have some stricter use. I mean, I understand the issue is trying to remove conflicts between agricultural and residential use, but people can have sheds, and I guess, you know, my neighbor could have a fenced-in area with a bunch of dogs, and they could be loud dogs barking, and I mean, there's lots of nuisances in town potentially, but I think to single out agricultural uses and not cover the issue more generally is a bit unfair. Let's see, 5.5.3, I'm not really sure why that's in there. There's already a section in the zoning ordinance on, let's see if I can find this, on nuisances in general. If you look at section 3.8 of the existing zoning ordinance, it says nuisances and hazards. No use may be made of any lot that may become an excessive annoyance or nuisance to other properties by reason of unsightliness or the excessive emission of odors, dust, fumes, smoke, noise, heat, or glare, or unreasonably increase the fire hazard to adjoining properties as measured by fire insurance ratings. So that's already in there, and I guess my question would be, if this doesn't add anything extra, then why is it in there? 5.5.4 I would support. That seems like it's a sensible requirement. 5.5.5, Karen McRae she couldn't be here, but she passed on a note from her that I guess there's a state law about vendors such as Agway can't sell fewer than 12 chicks or birds. So there's kind of in order to get 6 hens, you need to find somebody that you go in with, and you both buy it from Agway or something. So I'm not really sure why the number 6 was picked, but it seems a little bit restrictive. And then finally, 5.5.5C, that seems a little bit strict to me. I'm not sure what other uses in town are restricted to be conducted by a resident of the premises. I mean, no matter what the use of a property, the property owner is responsible for that, and presumably someone has gone before the boards for a special exception, and they're responsible for meeting the terms of that special exception. So I don't really understand why that line is required for livestock and poultry. And that's all the comments that I have. Thank you.
Members of the board, we have any questions of Jason? Oh, he's here. Tim?
I'll refer this to Brian directly. These regulations, if adopted, would not apply to anyone in a retroactive sense. This would be strictly for new applications. Is that correct? I mean, we are not, if we adopt these regulations, we are not gonna go around town and telling farmers that they have to move buildings, or they can't, they just wouldn't be able to conduct any new operations or new permits, or someone who has nothing would not be able to start something new without meeting these regulations.
That's correct. If there were people that already had a certain number of chickens and it somehow restricted them more, then those would not be affected. But people that do want to come in and get a certain number of chickens or livestock, or do something within these allowances, then those would be applicable.
So then I would say to you, Jason, that I feel that these regulations would not be unduly restrictive to anyone who is a farmer in town or who has a farm operation at this time, where they would be grandfathered for all of these regulations. So if that makes any sense, I'd just like to add that to your comments.
I think it does, and I guess I would, if the board is kind of keeping that in line, at least consider changing 551 so the 50 feet limit is only for the R and R1 zones and not agricultural.
I mean,
Barbara?
I have some comments based on Jason's comments, but I think, are we doing a general discussion now, or how are we handling this?
Really to ask questions of Jason's
Right.
based upon his testimony.
Right, yeah.
Anybody
Thank
else
you.
wishing to speak in reference to this proposed change to the zoning ordinance, or amendment to the zoning ordinance? Okay.
Thank you.
Without closing the public hearing, we're about to open it up for discussion by members of the board. Tim?
Well, just quickly, we were on 551. Farm buildings shall be located no closer than 50 feet to any property line. Does that apply to the R1 zone?
Yes,
Yes.
which means that you can't put a chicken coop in Pinardville.
Okay.
There's no lot in there big enough to
So-
put a 50-foot setback on all the property lines and
So-
leave you anything left to put a chicken coop.
So, if you go from 551 to 552, it seems to be contradictory, because if in the R1 zone, you can be closer than, you can be at 50 feet, no closer than 50 feet. Why do we go to 552 in an agricultural zone, require them to be 100 feet from a boundary where the
Point before.
residential could be 50 feet to the,
That doesn't make any sense.
50 feet to the agricultural boundary? You're actually penalizing the agricultural and conservation districts and making them be 100 feet when the neighbor at the residential district line could be 50 feet from that line. So I think there's just some contradiction in there that needs to be cleaned up.
Barbara?
I think that had been my point before, that it was stricter on the people in the zone that don't need the special exception. You know, our zoning ordinance is complicated enough. I think Jason raises, I think Tim's point in regards to this that we've discussed is a valid one. And I think Jason's point in regards to the fact that a lot of these things are handled somewhere else is a valid one. And to the extent that we can keep things the same, I think we should. I understand that the ZBA, which is what drove this, has spent a lot of time on this issue. But I need to tell you, you know, building permits are governed by the general zoning ordinance. And if you start to, and I don't have my whole thing as to what a farm building is, but I can buy a shed from Home Depot, call it a shed, put it up 35 feet from my boundary, and then turn it into an agricultural use without blinking an eye. So I think this restriction for a farm building is really just gonna cause problems. We have building setbacks, that's what people should be using. And so I sort of agree with Jason, there are other regulations to cover that, that should be eliminated. I had a problem with the 100-foot setback before. I think his point about 553, that there's a nuisance provision existing in place, is what should stand, because I've never liked the language that says shall not degrade or adversely affect or undermine the residential character of the buildings or of surrounding properties. You are never going to get a room full of people to agree on what affects the value of property, and a real estate broker will tell you nothing affects the value of your property, because when you go to sell it, if it's someone who never saw your property before, they didn't know what was there before, so there was no adverse effect on what that future buyer would have. I mean, that's what they say whenever a new development goes in. There's no adverse effect on any of the adjoining or abutting property. You know, best management practices, I think, is a good reference. I had a problem with the 6 before, you know. You could have 6 really nasty chickens that could be a nuisance and 12 really nice chickens that you wouldn't even know were there. I think it's arbitrary and it's gonna be impossible to enforce. And I think Jason's point as to being conducted by a resident of the premises is sort of an interesting one about, why are we giving chickens all this attention? Could I raise cats and dogs and not be a resident of the premises? It would appear so.
Yes, you can.
So I think he raises valid points, and we could make this a lot simpler and still allow it by special exception.
You can allow anything by special exception and let the zoning board prescribe by deliberation and by the decision, how many chickens someone can have.
Right.
And how close to the property line it can be.
And just for reference, we don't define farm building, but we do define farm. And it says any parcel of land which is used in raising of agricultural products, livestock, poultry, and dairy products, including necessary farm structures and storage of equipment used. So it does embrace the building concept and definition of farm, so.
Yeah, but you can't have a farm in the R1 zone, so how do you have a farm building to begin with, even by special exception?
Now, I was just
No, I
reacting
know.
to your comment, do we define a farm building? We don't, but we define a farm, and it includes buildings in it.
Yes, but if somebody had a farm and wanted to build a barn, is he now limited to being 100 feet from the property line because it says so in this particular paragraph, even though it references chickens?
Yeah, I think
Well,
it needs to go.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think 552 is a good rule.
I mean, we already
should
have
both-
Again,
zoning
again, it's-
setbacks in every zone.
It's penalizing people in the agricultural and conservation districts, and that's where we want to encourage farms.
Now, what about the 50 feet to any property line? I have a real problem with that because of the nature of the being, is if this whole section is meant to govern the specifics in the R1 and R2 zone, that eliminates more than 50% of the properties to begin with can't meet this ordinance
Well, and this
at the
board,
get-go.
and this board has approved developments in R1 zones that only have 100 feet frontage because they had water and sewer, so you would eliminate all of those.
Yes, Tim?
Well, if the zoning board of appeals, or the zoning board of adjustment, I should say, drafted this regulation for 50 feet, they obviously are planning to have people come in and apply for relief from it, so at that point, let people go to the ZBA and apply for relief from that standard.
Well, we had representatives of the zoning board here,
Correct.
and I believe they alluded to 2 specific cases they had this year. In terms of applications for special exception or variance to allow chickens in the R1, R2 zone. I don't know what specific it was. But I just find there's a lot of postage stamp size lots in R1 and R2. And I just don't think, I think it's too restrictive. Because it's a blanket no.
Well, unless you get a variance.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but it just complicates this whole issue. I mean, yes, Barbara?
I mean, this is really a pretty simple issue. People who were on non-agricultural and non-conservation lots wanted to raise chickens. There was a decision made they couldn't do it. But based on some of the feedback that got heard, it was decided that it should be allowed by special exception, which changes, the process and does allow it. In some circumstances, I think you can argue easier than if a variance. I mean, you can apply for a variance, a relief from anything. And so I think the intent was to allow the use with certain restrictions. I don't know that chickens deserve special rules on their buildings. Dogs don't, and I think as Jason pointed out, I've had dogs in my neighborhood that have been a heck of a lot more annoying than chickens, and I've had both. So to the extent buildings are addressed in the terms of the general zoning ordinance, I think that there is the ability of the ZBA to address it in regards to the general nuisance provisions under the special exception process.
I would agree.
I think you need to keep it simple, because I think that the more people are, don't understand what the rules are or subject to a board exercising its discretion, I think it makes it harder.
Phil?
Going along with that, one of the things that I had pondered over the last couple of weeks since they were in and made a presentation on this, along with that, because one of the things that I thought about is, and I don't know anybody that does, but other areas there are, people raise pigeons, carrier pigeons, people do it. There are clubs that people do this. And, to have a zoning ordinance that specifically talks about 6 chickens, and if somebody wanted to build a pigeon coop and have pigeons in the R1 or R2 zone, do we have a restriction on it? We don't have the issue with dogs, and it just seems that they're given this, as Barbara pointed out, this special, that may be made special in a zoning ordinance, and I think pigeons could be more aggravating than 6 chickens.
Yes.
So Barbara, would you suggest that we just adhere to the boundary line restrictions that are in the tables for these buildings?
Yes. As Jason pointed out, he believes that 552 is consistent with what's already in the ordinance, so why do we need it at all?
I think this section was meant to replace 5.5 in our
Okay.
zoning ordinance in its entirety.
All right. And as Jason pointed out, he was okay with keeping that. But, again, it makes it more restrictive. It doesn't make a lot of
Now,
sense.
the public hearing says amending section 555.
I forgot to bring my stuff to work, so I don't have it with me.
Yeah, it's just,
One paragraph.
it's one sentence.
Oh, so 552 is 55.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they've built on 5.5
Yeah, they've,
Correct.
by adding all
Expanded on
these
it.
other 1, 3, 4, and 5, and then A, B, and C.
Yes. Lowell, you've been very quiet over there.
No, I agree with the concept of trying to keep it simplified in general. Other than that, I don't have any other specific comments.
Tim?
So maybe we should take and leave 552 in, which is what it
Is in
says
now.
now, and then leave in 554.
Mhm.
We could amend 555 if we felt that some of those A, B, or C was redundant, and try to work with what we have, or throw the whole thing out and leave 5.5 as it is until next year and rework it properly with all the input from the boards.
I think
Okay.
I'm
Barbara?
sort of like Tim's suggestion. I mean, it would be nice for the ZBA to have something in front of it, since it had the issue a couple of times, or for people to know, and so if we kept 5.5 and kept 5.5.2, 4, and 5, and then
Eliminate-
after
Eliminate 1 and 3, Barbara?
1 and 3, and then
Yeah.
maybe we have another public hearing on 5.5 to see what the input is on the specifics. I mean, I think I talked about the 6, I just think it's gonna be unenforceable and
Yeah.
create a lot of problems.
Well, if the number
Maybe
of,
just keep 5.5B.
if the number of them becomes a problem, you can go back to 5.5.3, which talks
is
about
the
the annoyance
annoyance.
or nuisance.
Right.
I mean,
But so keep B
Well-
of that, so that the raising or keeping of livestock shall
yes.
be clearly incidental and subordinate to the
I think
use of the
that's the
lot for principal.
So you want to really
And I think that's the only one we need is B. Get rid of A and C.
B.
May I comment about the 6 chickens? I did a little research. I went over to the New Hampshire Cooperative Exchange, and on their little list of things, there's half dozen things about raising chickens.
That's 6 things about raising chickens.
No. But the reason for 6 chickens is a chicken lays between 5 and 6 eggs a week, generally 5. So if you have 6 chickens, that's 30 eggs. Now, a family of 4, that doesn't last a week in my house, because my boys would eat eggs all the time, if they could. But the reason for 6 is it produces between 30 and 36 eggs a week. And somebody has deemed that sufficient for a family of 4. Out of
That's
some
nice.
craziness, okay? So, as far as I'm concerned, the 6 chickens can be a decision the board makes, the ZBA. You come in and want a special exception to raise chickens, you make your case as to how many chickens you want, is what I think should happen. You gotta go there, you gotta go there anyway.
I would just say, as a lawyer, I think we might be stretching the bounds of constitutional rights and people's decision to have what size families they want.
Oh,
and
yeah, it's all
whether
kinds
they
of-
can supply adequate
Oh,
food
boy.
for them
Well,
on
if
our lots,
if they
but
wanna
I
sell
don't
the
think we
eggs.
need to go
Only
there.
an attorney
They
would
wanna
stretch
sell
it
it.
that far.
Just a
Yes, Phil.
follow-up to that thought, just a
Yeah.
follow-up to that thought.
Yeah.
So if you're raising 6 chickens, okay, what happens now if you have chicks? Are they chicks and not chickens?
Mm-hmm.
Chickens lay non-fertile eggs,
If
That's
they have
number
a
one.
rooster.
unless you got a rooster around.
But who says you can't have the rooster, it doesn't say you can't have a rooster come by and visit. Does it? It just says you can't have it,
Living there.
Wait a
I mean,
second,
what if the rooster came for 3 days?
I didn't check online at first.
Just,
service roosters.
you know,
Rooster service, a new business venture.
Excuse me.
Tim is looking at
Rooster
Tim.
stud.
I'm opposed to removing 555C, because I believe the statement conducted by a resident creates accountability for nuisances, proper management practices, and it provides an avenue for the town to pursue complaints by neighbors if they're in violation of the regulations. So if the resident has someone else in there handling the chickens, I think that it's a way for them to pass the buck and say, well, they're not my chickens, I don't know what's going on with them. So I think conducted by the resident, I think is a good ordinance, and I think it should be left in. Creates accountability.
Well, let's go back up to B then. If a property is clearly residential, how can raising chickens, unless it becomes really crazy, not be subordinate to the residential use of the property to begin with?
Well, I think that goes back to an issue that hit the courts in regards to a whole nother agricultural use of a resident. I don't particularly have a problem with that.
Don't we capture that in the first sentence anyways, the raising, keeping livestock and poultry as an accessory use of a principal residential use?
Well, I think the question is that gonna be the only condition, or are we going to keep?
I understand,
C.
doesn't that capture
Yeah,
C?
yeah, it is the same, yeah.
Okay, let's go to A. the six chicken issue with no roosters. Where are we
Eliminate-
gonna go with that?
Eliminate the
If
whole
anywhere.
line.
Yeah, get rid of
Eliminate
it.
the whole thing.
Get rid of it.
Now, are we gonna make a motion tonight,
Yeah,
or
what
are
are
we,
we doing?
or is this just for
Discussion.
discussion purposes,
Well,
Mr. Chair?
If we revise this proposal, it has to be revised, it has to be noticed, and it has to be
Notified.
heard again
Heard, yeah.
in January.
Well, we have that scheduled,
That's the
right?
assumption
We have that
anyway,
scheduled
that
already.
That's
So-
allowable.
So if we make a revision tonight by motion, it will be published in its revised
And
form for
reheard,
people
yes.
to come in and comment on at the
Yeah.
next meeting?
Yes.
Well, so let's go
Yes.
right through them then.
So, Like-
Okay,
we'll
five
start-
point 5.1.
I was gonna make a motion if you want, Barbara.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to eliminate 5.551, to leave in 552, to remove 553, leave in 554,
Stop there.
This is his motion.
and leave in 555, but remove A from 555. We can debate C at the next,
Okay, at the next
at the
hearing.
next hearing.
Okay,
Um,
because that won't be a substantive change. All right.
So in essence, I'm making a motion to remove 551, 553, and 555A.
Second.
The motion by Tim, seconded by Barbara. Brian?
I just have a question. I know it was brought up that 552, there was a concern that the ag and conservation districts would be more
Restricted.
restricted than the other lots, and if you're gonna remove
No,
if you're gonna
we're
assume that
taking one
farm
out.
buildings would be subject to the regular setbacks, that clause would still make it more restrictive.
But our point was, it's
In
already in,
agriculture.
it's already in the ordinance.
But maybe what Brian's pointing out
Yes.
is it doesn't make any sense.
But it doesn't make,
Leave it there?
it doesn't make sense if you're gonna
If the
allow,
logic is to take out one, your logic should
Ah.
control for the other, really. If you're controlling your building location by your regular zoning
you're
ordinance.
sort of changing the whole thing
Yep.
by doing this, so if you're gonna do it, then you may want to think about that number, that setback, and maybe make it
I mean,
according to the
I'm comfortable with taking
normal
it out
setback.
and just letting farm buildings go by the same setbacks as all the other buildings in town. I mean,
The general history is that they always have.
Can you amend my motion?
I'm okay with that.
So I'll amend my motion for section 552 to remove the 100-foot setback and replace it with proper wordage that states that we would follow the setbacks as prescribed by the zone.
Now, you
do we need
understand
to
what
do
that paragraph,
I would just eliminate it.
Eliminate it.
now, do you understand what that paragraph is trying to do?
Yes, we do.
It affects the property line in the agricultural and conservation zone that's adjacent to a residential zone. Only that property line.
However, when the applicant goes in for a special exception in the residential zone and is given permission to put his building 50 feet close to the property line, no more than 50 feet by the zoning Board of Adjustments decision, assuming, then now you're back to punishing the agricultural zone.
In other words, my next door neighbor, if I'm on the lot line, and I have conservation on one side of me and a resident on the other side, the resident to my left can come close to me 50 feet, but the resident on my right, who is the farm, can only come 100 feet. Well, how is that fair?
it's not.
It's not.
So, I guess I don't understand why you'd have any reference to the location of the buildings if we're gonna allow the general section on setbacks to control.
That would cover it.
Well, then
I think we ought to get rid of 552.
so then eliminate 552 in its entirety? I'll make a motion to eliminate 552, amend my motion, in addition to the other ones that we noted as removing.
And my second stands.
Okay. Now, since I haven't closed the public hearing on this agenda, Jason raised his hand and he had a comment. I'm gonna take it.
I just wanted to point out, I personally would support removal of 552, but To answer the question of why you might not want to remove it, in residential zones, someone would have to come before the board and get a special exception. So there'd be some process by which they'd have to go through. In the agricultural and CO zones, it's permitted by right. So if there's an expectation of people that are on the other side of the zoning boundaries, that they want some kind of supervision over what goes next to them, this is at least in there already. Maybe the board wants to make it a smaller distance or take it out, but just realize that people in the A and CO zones can have farm buildings by right, and this is, I guess, for whatever reason, deemed to provide some zone of protection to residential districts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
No change my mind.
Now, based upon, I'm gonna close the public hearing at the moment, so that makes it a legal closure at the moment. We are seriously in intent of modifying this amendment, so therefore, there will be another public hearing with public input before it's finalized, if this motion carries. So is there any last discussion on 5.5.1, which is part of the motion, which is to remove it?
Well, Gail, can you read back the motion?
Oh, I got it all written down here
Okay.
next to me, here. It's the elimination of 5.5.2 in its entirety.
As well.
And one,
And one.
and one.
Well, he was doing, he already
Yeah,
did
No, he's
one.
going down the
He's
He
going
list.
already
down the
said
list.
one.
5.5.3, as is.
Eliminated, I made a.
Eliminated, 5.5.3. 5.5.4
Stays in.
stays in. 5.5.5 stays in, and B stays in under conditions,
And C.
and C.
A comes out.
A comes out.
No, we're not doing any
Any
harm.
discussion, further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. And so what this requires is that Brian, we need to rewrite this and probably get it back out to us in some kind of mailing as quickly as possible, so that we have this in front of us in the proper channels. And would you please also make sure the chair of the ZBA and the Conservation Commission both get copies of this as amended? Do we want anybody else to receive copies of any amendment we've proposed besides Conservation and ZBA? All right, move on to number 2. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 2 is, notice public hearing, shall the town adopt amendment number 2 is proposed by the planning board amending section 2.1.2 overlay districts, adding a new overlay district entitled GRC Groundwater Resource Conservation District, and adding a new subsection under section 13 overlay district description, section 13.6, describing the rules and regulations regarding the new overlay district. These rules and regulations would apply to the town's wellhead protection program, the wellhead protection areas for public water supplies, and the town's stratified drift aquifers, as shown in the town of Goffstown's aquifer transmissivity map. That was the notice that went out. Per the last planning board meeting a week ago, the planning board had decided to sort of table this and go with additional study on it, and and include some additional groups and, you know, members of the community that would feel interested. And so therefore, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission did provide a letter requesting to remove it, and that it be delayed till the following year for zoning amendment. So that's the request before you, and I'll turn it back to you.
Without reading it into the record, I'm gonna give it to the secretary so that it's written into the record. but it basically says that the staff is currently making revisions to the source water protection plan as report as requested by the town engineer. Once the revisions have been made, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission staff will meet with the Goffstown Village, Grassmere Water Precincts, and the town fire chief to review the proposed plan and the source water protection program. Now, that hadn't happened up till now. Upon getting the agency's review and input, staff will return to the planning board at a later date with this information and a revised plan. And I'll pass that on to our secretary. Tim?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the letter and the recommendation from the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission and to remove amendment number 2 in its entirety from the town warrant.
Second.
I'm gonna hold up on the motion and open a public hearing to get any comments from the public. Anybody in the public wishing to speak in reference to this amendment?
Sure.
Please come up, sir.
I'm Al Gammons, I'm chairman of the Goffstown Village Water Precinct. And we had a meeting with Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission about a month ago. They came in with basically the same recommendations. They were totally unaware of the fact that all of this is in the works right now, mandated by DES and EPA and the other agencies that we're under. See, we're not a town department. We're a separate precinct set up by the state in 1891 to handle the water. Back then we had the street lights and fire protection and a whole bunch of things, but we got rid of everything except the water. All of the things are in place. We do inspections in the well area on a regular basis. There are definite restrictions that have been laid upon all of the property owners within a certain radius of our water sources there. We do patrol the 2 reservoirs up on the mountain on a regular basis. We had, last year, I think we had 1 horse incident where we had to turn an animal on a rider away. And we do check the thing out for beavers and any other things in there. These are all part of our responsibility, and it's pretty clear. The 2 gentlemen who came to our meeting from Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission also brought along Rick Skarinka from the DES. He was very upset and has contacted the water board and those 2 individuals saying that they had gone off in a direction all by themselves, and he was very displeased with their action. I want to assure everybody that this area is being patrolled. We are working in accord with all of the factors that are laid down for us to follow as far as water testing and surveillance. We are allowing the use of one of the fields near one of our wells with very tough restrictions, and the people there are aware that if they have 1 screw up, they're out of there, and they're training some dogs there. They clean up. They're doing a real good job. We did write a letter to Southern New Hampshire Planning, and unfortunately I only brought 1 copy, but I'll leave that with you. We feel that if there is anything that has to do with water, it should come to us, and not just suggestions and things like that. We get those all the time, and we do review them, but to come up with a definite plan that hasn't gone through our board, and so that we can review and see what is needed and what is appropriate and what is already being done, it puts an extra burden on you folks and also on us, because we have to go out and research all this stuff. We have not treated this lightly. Water is a very serious concern with us, and we're considering other things like now. Within the next 5 years, we'll probably have another well online. We're looking at sources, have been for 3 or 4 years. point where we're eating the seed corn, we will have to have some sort of a point available.
Okay.
On a lighter side, at our last board meeting, we did pass a resolution that from now on, all fire trucks are to be painted lime green. And, we thought that would be great.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of Mr. Gammon by members of the board?
I have
Okay.
kind of an
Thank you, Rob.
unrelated question. I was wondering who, there was a very nice timber harvest, by the way, up on the
Yes.
mountain.
Have you toured that?
Oh, yeah. Very nice job. Who was the, who's your forester? Who? The harvest.
It's a gentleman from Ware, and I forgot his name at the moment. But, the price on wood chips now for pellet stoves and such make it, valuable to these folks to clean up every scrap, and they've done a beautiful job.
Yeah,
This
if
is
anybody on
better
the
than ever
board,
before.
if anybody on the board wants to see a really nice timber harvest job, just drive up Summit Road. It's right there on the left. You can see lots and lots of the.
Mountain Road, not Summit Road.
Mountain Road, right?
Mountain Road.
Yeah, Mountain Road.
Mount Rose. Thanks, Colin.
Yeah, just one, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One other question. Over by the Shell station, is there a, valve for a potential connection
Yes.
with Grassmere?
Yes, there is.
There is, so you do have the ability to.
But we don't have a pipe. Our pipe ends
no pipe.
at, Villa Augustina and
Right.
goes up Norman Road, so there's a gap between the two.
Right, but you have the ability to,
If somebody lays a pipe.
right.
Yeah, pipe or a hose,
Yeah.
either one can be used
Yeah.
on a temporary basis, and
Right.
we have, that's part of our plan.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good question.
How long of a stretch is that
It's a little over a mile,
where there's no pipe?
no pipe. You know right where those pipes end.
Both sides.
Yeah.
Super, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the board?
Okay.
The chairman of the Goffstown Village Precinct, Water Precinct, has submitted this letter. I want to make it part of the record, and I want it written into the record, so that it doesn't get obscured or lost. And do we have the option of making a copy of this upstairs?
I can?
And so they can have a copy of his letter back.
No, I have a copy.
You have a
That was
copy?
for us.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
just had one copy for us.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it'll be in the minutes of the meeting, it'll come back out to us in its entirety, and you can interpret it as you see fit.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members of the board, any particular discussions before I close the public hearing? Then I will close the public hearing. Members of the board, what's your pleasure?
Motion on the table.
There is a motion on the floor by Tim, seconded by Barbara. Seconded by Collis, excuse me.
Yeah.
I didn't write the names down, apologize. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. It has been removed. Okay. Brian, those are the only two items on the agenda. I do have in my file something that appoints some member of this board to some illustrious part-time job as a member of the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. And it is signed by the selectmen, and I'm gonna pass it over here because I didn't see Mr. Devanz's signature on this epistle. Do you wanna sign it, care to sign it, as a member of this board?
I'll sign it, but he has to be
Carl
sworn.
needs to be sworn in before.
Then I sign it.
Before he signs it. Yeah. We figured we could probably take care of that after the meeting, maybe. if-
Okay, please do that.
That way nobody has to
Good
sit.
idea.
Okay, good idea.
Charlie Brown is calling.
Okay. It's not Charlie Brown's hour yet,
It
Uh,
almost is.
almost. Brian, you suggested to me before the meeting, you had a couple other
Yes,
items that you wish to discuss.
yes, sir.
One in public and one in non-public.
That's correct.
Okay.
Oh.
I apologize.
Talk fast, Brian.
This was something that I was emailed by Sue on Monday. This is an email from her, and it's regards to the Blackbriar project. In order to accept any land or acquire any land, the Board Board of Selectmen needs a recommendation from the Planning Board and from the Conservation Commission. So consequently, last night at the Conservation Commission, Patty brought that up with them, and then tonight, you know, I am bringing it up with you. Basically, this statute just states that there has to be a formal recommendation from the Planning Board, and so that's basically what it is.
A question. I know we've already dealt with this project, but isn't this something we would need to have a public hearing on?
Well,
That I wasn't sure about,
you
so.
care, I have,
Or does the Board of Selectmen leave?
did you
Do we
get
leave
the,
to them?
did you get a copy of the Patty Gale memo?
Yeah, we have it right here.
Okay. As I see this, it's purely an informal thing, and then the selectmen notice
The public hearing.
the public
Okay.
hearing.
All right.
Is that kind of, okay? So, I would approach this subject with a request that somebody make a motion to the effect of 14(4)(a) in a second, if somebody is willing to do so. Tim?
Can we have a brief explanation of part one and part two? Do they contradict each other, or are they in line with each other? Roman numeral 1 and 2.
I think that's
Different.
They're different. Two
it is-
deals with
Property
property
that the
that's
town
already
already
established,
owns.
owned, or managed in some way, and what action the
Correct.
Board of Selectmen can take in regards to that. One has to do with property that doesn't have independent regulations or is not already owned.
That's correct.
Now, any motion we make this allows, the way I read it, for the selectmen to sell, buy, or both.
Right.
Which means that they could, in fact, sell it,
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering about.
yes.
Let me give you a little bit of the discussion at Monday night's Board of Selectmen
Okay,
meeting.
please.
The discussion was, should the town accept the open space parcel in fee ownership, so the town would own it? The Piscataquag Land Trust would hold an easement over it and administer the easement over it. In fact, the developer was gonna give $17,000, I believe it was. 15 to the Piscataquag Land Trust as a stewardship fund. The other option is the open space would be held by a homeowners association,
No.
which I personally don't like. I like the idea of the town holding the parcel,
Mhm.
with the understanding that the easement will be held by another party, Piscataquag Land Trust, and the developer will provide the money to set up the stewardship of the parcel. And that would be my recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, personally. We talked about a lot of different things. Talked about taking the property off the tax rolls. Well, it really only generates a couple of $100 a year in taxes because it's mostly wetlands. It's low-value land. It's at the lowest tax level.
Some current use, no doubt.
Yet,
Current use.
if the town owned it and there was easement on it, we could set up language in the easement that would allow us to go in and do selective timber harvest, and you could make more money harvesting timber off it than you could with the taxes it would generate. So that was part of the discussion as well.
But would that also, if the town owns it, would it be open to the public
Yes.
for use?
Yes.
Passive recreation.
Just
Phil.
a couple of questions there with it, and we really did get into that portion of it. If this was going to be managed by, not the town, and by another entity such as the Russell Foundation, or the other trust, yeah, the question's gonna come up if there is a timber harvest. Since the town is not managing, it's being managed by another entity, it would probably be appropriate that the other entity would be the one that would be overseeing the timber harvest. And the argument would probably be, since they're the ones that are doing the management of it, that they're the ones that should be also getting the income from the timber harvest. I said, but that's a discussion for another day, but that has not transpired yet. So those issues we aren't aware, we don't know yet, because we haven't had that discussion. But there was quite a bit of discussion also as far as the drainage being in the open space, and whether or not it could be carved out, and the Board of Selectmen issue was that they felt that by looking at that, and if they were to start to request that that be taken out, the boundary, that then they're getting into the planning process. And they question, they don't feel comfortable trying to do that. So that was, a concern that did come up. I did bring up the fact that there was a compliance hearing that would be, that the developer would have to go to, and that if he didn't meet the compliance hearing, that there would be a homeowners association. And then you have the issue that came up, that if you have the town accepting the road, they're accepting one of those drainage swales, those drainage that's in the road. And it appears that that one drains into the one that's in the wetlands, so then you're coming one entity owning, being responsible for one, but not the other, and with issues. So, one of the things that I had brought up to the board, mentioned to the board, to the selectmen, was that this is the first of this type of an issue, that we're coming up with it being one in the road, that the town would eventually be accepting the road, so we would be getting that drainage, and the other one that's from that road into the other parcel. So I guess the concern that I have is setting a precedent for future development of open space developments coming in and seeing this, and then going down the road of having these in the open space. Because of it's just, the discussion comes in of who's responsible for what. And some of the other issues were, well, it's an open space development. If it was a homeowners association, is the public still allowed to use the open space? Or does the homeowners association have the ability to put a restriction that it's only for homeowners of that? So, with all of these issues coming up, the board just felt concerned that they don't want to be in, they're not a planning board, and this is what's in front of them, and that the developer appeared, and by reading the motion and the recommendations from that meeting, that the developer appeared to meet all the requirements according to the land use regulations, and they didn't want to, they had a concern of penalizing him because he's the first one that's ever had this issue. So there is a concern about the precedent setting with it, but generally it appeared that we're going to accept this drainage when we accept the road. So we already have that portion, and if we accept the land, the donation of this land, it's in there anyway. So it was tough not to try to accept it.
Well, in thinking of Worthley Hill, Bog Road, and in this particular black bar, I know at Worthley Hill we have drainage in the open space. I know in Bog Road we had drainage and retention in the open space. And in both instances, I can't remember if there was any final action taken on whether there was public access to those open spaces.
Bog Road there is,
But Bog Road
Worthley Hill
there
there
is.
is not.
Worthley Hill there is not.
Right.
So we've done it different ways already.
Pardon me? Yeah.
I mean,
Collis.
they're really two separate issues. The drainage issue is one issue.
Right.
Who's gonna hold the open space is another issue. Now, the way it's set up right now, there is a sizable chunk of one of the detention basins that is in the open space parcel. And I don't think that's a good setup. And so there's two ways you can handle it. One, you can redefine the open space and draw lines that go out around the detention basin, so it's not in the open space. That's the cleanest and easiest, and the one that I would suggest is the way that we go. The other is you can write language in the conservation easement that allows the town to enter into the easement, to maintain the detention basins, but that's unnecessary complication.
Yep. Barbara?
You know, all of this was discussed when we had this plan, and this board approved it. We talked about public access and the fact that the developer did not want to create a homeowners association because it's a pain in the neck for the developers, and people don't want to buy a house with a homeowners association. And it was very clear that that's what they were, Mr. Mitchell said, we're trying to avoid a homeowners association. And we knew when we approved that plan that the location of the drainage and in the open space was an issue. That was all very clearly before the board, and we approved it. Because, you know, we're gonna have public parking here, and we're gonna have public access. And the developer got his yield plan, he got the building on the spaces with this wetlands stuff that is sort of mind-boggling. And now he's got this big parcel of land that was frankly otherwise undevelopable that he wants somebody else to own, and we approved it. And it was very clear from the applicant to this board that that's what they were doing. So frankly, I don't know that the board has any basis to not recommend this to the Board of Selectmen. All of this was raised as an issue at the time.
As what, recommended as what?
As the fact that that the applicant was gonna have to figure out what to do with the drainage, that they didn't want to carve, he said explicitly he did not wanna carve that out, because who's gonna own it? Then he has to sell a house that owns that drainage issue. I think what you talked about with the easement is what Phil is talking about, that it's gonna end up, the town is sort of gonna own it, the conservation is gonna manage it, and then there's gonna have to be an easement from the town to itself to manage it. I mean, it really sort of,
Since they own it, they have the right of
Right.
access,
right.
Right.
So,
even if there's an easement from management.
I'm assuming they built a road down to it, right, as part of the plan?
it's
Yes.
in the open space.
Oh, yeah.
But doesn't the road imply that the town has the right to pass and repass to manage the drainage area?
Well, I suppose it
But the
would,
point is that if,
but they get out of managing it, that's
Right,
the thing
right.
is,
Well,
it's now the town responsibility to manage it,
no.
whereas,
yes, it is.
oh, yes.
No, not if the
This
the
category.
land trust holds the easement. They will be managing, that's the beauty
The
of it.
land
They will
trust
also
is
enforce
not
it.
gonna be managing that drainage.
No,
Now,
no, not the drainage, the open space parcel. I'm
the
talking
open
about.
space.
And the
I
beauty
mean-
is they can enforce it. They now can come in and do the enforcement.
Well, I think that's gonna be a discussion for the easement in regards to the Board of
Who
Selectmen.
gets the rights of timber harvest?
And
that's not-
that's all part of
And
the
it's
easement.
not, just so you know, Phil, that's not uncommon to have conservation easements allow the underlying property owner to harvest the timber and take the profits from it. That's not uncommon at all. But, you know, it's a.
The town can manage it and harvest the timber, it's correct,
Absolutely.
and take the money.
Well, you know, it's very easy to say that the town can manage it, okay, but if you were there, if you heard the issue is, when these things are accepted, and this is basically an unfunded mandate coming down from the state for these drainage issues, okay? We don't have the manpower for it, and we have Public Works that all this is going on onto Public Works, one after the other. And no matter what, we're supposed to handle it. So it's very easy to say that the town's gonna manage it, but unfortunately, the town's resources keep getting less and less. And
Well,
that's a toughie.
And that's why I think in the end, the town should own the rights to any harvesting or any other aspects
Yeah,
that
but that's
happen on their
not
property.
our jurisdiction.
I know, it's this, but since this gentleman in the audience is a member of a town board, I'm gonna let him speak, even though I've closed the public hearing. Jason?
This is not,
We're
We're not having a public
we're
hearing.
not- we said we're not having a public hearing, this wasn't noticed.
Then, excuse me? This is a member of a public board in this town, and I will take comment from this member of the board.
Jason Sachs, I will only speak for factual basis, as a member of PLC, which is the potential land trust in question here, their land protection committee. The way a conservation easement works, just to clarify, is that the land trust would be the responsible party, not for managing the property or determining its use, but for determining that whoever is the landowner abides by the restrictions of the easement. So they don't say,
Right.
you know, give us the timber harvest or determine when that's gonna occur. That's up to whoever the property owner is, whether it's the town or somebody else. And I guess I'm vaguely familiar with this project, if it's the one that's off of Montalona Road.
Yeah,
And,
you know,
okay.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah, I walked the project about a year ago. The town doesn't really have any parks or other stuff in that area of town, other than, I guess, there's a landlocked piece that's in yellow up on that map. So from the board's point of view, I would think there'd be some value in meeting recreational needs of the town, by the town owning the parcel.
Thank you.
That was discussed Monday night as well, Jason, just for information, and the
One
fact that it
other
was
issue.
brought out in the master plan.
One of the selling points, or one of the points that's been brought up to the Board of Selectmen, is that we have an Economic Development Council that's looking to promote economic development in the community, and this is a positive way to help for them, to help promote economic development. And I just want to make one comment to this board, that I can see what's going to happen here. If this gets accepted by the town, okay, and it becomes this park with this public parking, these houses get sold, and now we have people that are coming from out of town that are parking in the neighborhood. The residents will come into the Board of Selectmen, and they will request that this be residents only. So the point that I'm making, okay, just so that the board is aware for the future, that it's being, one of the positive things is that this is great for economic development for the community, and what we're gonna happen down the road is we're gonna be asked for restrictions on who parks there.
But if the parking's on town land,
I'm just saying,
you know, what basis is there for that request?
I'm just,
Lots of people can request all kinds of weird things, and
well,
Yes.
there's no basis for it.
Really? Tell that to the people who live by Glen Lake.
that's right.
I don't think we wanna go there this evening.
No,
Not
I'm just
saying, Phil's just raising a point in regards to management issues that are gonna be down the line, but this board was well aware of it when we approved this development. The applicant didn't try to hide a thing, he was very clear.
And we accepted it
Yeah.
Right.
on a unanimous vote. Yes,
How
Tim?
did we morph from Goffstown's open space with passive recreation to a public park with out-of-town parkers? How did we get from A to B there?
Because
It's not.
we're changing the concept of the development by doing what we're doing.
Tonight, right here and now?
No.
With the approval of this development, which eliminated the homeowners association, you have changed the concept of your open space development. Your open space development was conceived in regards to creating what would have been a neighborhood with houses encompassing this, and creating a smaller neighborhood where the neighborhood still had the benefits of the entire parcel, and the town benefited from that by virtue of the open space. We have morphed into developers realizing that homeowners associations are pains in the necks, people don't like to deal with them, and wanting to deed the open space over to the town for passive or active recreational use, where the homeowners who essentially have this in their backyard are no longer responsible for it. That is what's happening, because homeowners associations are problems. And people don't wanna buy houses that have homeowners associations with them. They want to have conservation and open space, so you are creating town-managed, and in this case, the hope is PLC-managed, open space areas throughout town that are gonna be open for use. And it's gonna be up to the Board of Selectmen in crafting the easement with the land use board that's going to manage it in regards to what uses are going to be there.
And can't the Board of Selectmen craft ordinances that place restrictions on prior to them becoming a nuisance? Saying that, could the Board of Selectmen, for instance, say, this is for use by the town residents only at that time?
Yeah,
Because we've accepted no federal money, there's no reason for anyone to have a legal
Well, I mean, I
argument.
think Phil was just raising that, it doesn't need to be, Phil was just using that because it was a clear example. The point is that it becomes a use monitoring question for the town, whereas up till now, it has been a use monitoring situation for the homeowner.
I understand.
You as a private property owner, when you have a dispute with your neighbor, you can't come into town hall and say, make my neighbor stop being a nuisance. You have to sue him individually, because the town says you own your lot, it's not our business to enforce the regs. What you've done is you've now created a municipal obligation to enforce
Okay.
the regulations.
Okay.
And Phil just used that as an example.
But as an example, the Board of Selectmen do not have to approve the purchase or the acceptance of the title of this land. Am I correct?
That's correct.
No, our
And
approval
if they
is
do, if they don't accept the property, then it's likely back to the board.
right, because that was a condition of our approval.
That was a condition of our approval. So, they do have an option if they feel that it's not in the best interest of the town to do that, to not accept it and then send it back to the planning board for,
And we'll need to conduct public hearings. I'd like to hear what the public has to say.
But I think what the point is, the statute gives that purview to the Board of Selectmen, not
Yep.
us.
and the selectmen have several, have two meetings, two public hearings.
Right.
And based upon a public, on a petition, I believe it has to go on the town warrant.
Right, that's correct.
So there's plenty of avenues
Right,
to,
And the developer knows that.
Right. I mean,
Take
he's
care of
very
it.
abundant.
if there's a way. Tim?
And should this come back here, it'd be an opportunity to clean up some of these gray areas regarding the drainage areas and different things, if the board sees fit to try to clean them up so that they become accessible to DPW without worrying about who's covering that easement over that particular area where the
Well,
drainage.
I mean, I can assure you, PLC does not want to be taking care of the drainage.
But can I just ask a question?
Yes, sir.
How, just for clarification, you said if the board wants to clean it up, are you okay, but the issue that the Board of Selectmen has is they have the perception that they have they feel that they're in a position that if they say that we want this carved out, that now they're in a land use that's not their function and
That's
that
why they
it
kick it
should-
back, that's why
Well,
they kick it
see,
back to the
that's-
planning board.
I understand that, okay, because I sit on here, but I have members on that board that have never sat on the planning board, and they don't realize this, okay, because my point to them is that there's a compliance hearing that he has to go to. If we don't do this, and he goes back to that compliance hearing, or it could go back to that compliance and say, and for example, you could say, well, we'll accept it if perhaps the planning board could change these lines, carve this out, or make some, they don't feel comfortable because they feel that's not their place. They feel that's planning, land use, and that they're dealing with what's in front of them that was brought to them from the planning board. So there has to be some, I'm not the person that can convince them of that. in
And
other
that's why
words.
they're asking us for a recommendation.
Exactly, so if there's somehow
do
that
tonight.
that could be made clear to them,
So make a
so
recommendation.
that they have an understanding that there could be changes to this, they don't,
I understand, Phil.
Well, I'll make a motion, try to make a motion, that we recommend to the Board of Selectmen that the town accept the open space parcel with the understanding that there will be an easement over the parcel that'll be managed by a third-party land trust.
But remember now, the land trust does not manage the property. They.
Who will-
Subject to
who
what is
will
acceptable
accept
easement with the
To both
PLC.
parties, to the town and PLC. And it's as simple as that, so that's my motion.
Second.
Could you say it again then?
We recommend to the Board of Selectmen that the town accept
The open
the open space parcel with the understanding that there will be a third party who will oversee the parcel and the conservation easement that's created.
Can you please change that,
Sure.
providing that there's an agreement
Right.
with acceptable easement terms?
Yes. Yes,
That's what we're talking about,
So-
not I don't want,
yep,
it's
yep.
easement.
An easement that's acceptable to the town.
Did you say
Just
something
out
about
of-
moving the line?
Now,
They need to work that.
I think
Just
that's plain.
clarification on that, when you say easement that's acceptable to the town?
And the managing
Oh,
PLC.
okay, but when you say the town, do you mean planning board, board of selectmen, or what do you mean by town? What?
Board of Selectmen.
Governing body.
Yeah, just for a clarification, so that it's clear, that's all.
Right,
Yeah.
because it's technically becomes your warrant article.
I
Okay.
just wanna make sure that we're all on the same
Yeah,
page.
the governing body.
Does it need to be clarified also that it's an access easement, or?
No, that'll all be worked out
Because that was
when the
part of
easement's
what we
crafted.
talked about, with the parking area was on the plan.
that was one of the
and
conditions.
The road area and all that, they're gonna have to work that out.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. I'll take comments on the motion. Tim?
So I have a question for you, Collis. Does that mean, based on this motion, should it pass, that this will come back to the planning board at a subsequent date for these clarifications, or is not gonna come back to the planning board?
May or may not.
Yeah,
Nope.
I'm not sure.
Okay, but what clarifications does Tim mean?
I think what Tim is referring to, if the Board of Selectmen in acceptance of the easement, or the title, and the establishment of the easement, wish to add conditions to that, that requires that it come back to the planning board, then it would come back to there, if you want a new line drawn on the plan, so to speak,
Right.
or a new note on the plan about drainage.
Yeah, it'd be
Or
a
new-
Back to the
plan
board.
amendment.
I guess
It would
my
be a plan
question,
amendment.
my question though is, how can that be conveyed clearly to them that that's that's
To
perfectly?
your board?
Let them read our minutes, that's all we just got done talking about.
Well, I'm just, sometimes I have a difficult task, that's all I'm saying.
Okay, Brian, can you manage to email all the selectmen the minutes of this public hearing?
Or just, the
Or
portion,
just
portion of
the
it.
pertinent one,
Gail, are you gonna make it so we all make sense? Okay, thanks.
she will save us.
Well, when we do the
Again.
minutes of this meeting,
It's almost an impossible task, by the way, so you gotta do one before you.
That's why she gets the
All
big
right.
bucks.
There's a motion on the floor, we've had plenty of discussion, I'm gonna call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Any abstentions? Don't see any, okay. So there is a recommendation to the BOS. Now,
All right, what's next?
what other criteria do you have in mind over here?
Non-public session?
This is, yes.
I have
Then
missed
we need
Charlie
to sign off on the TV?
again.
But you don't have a DDR?
What's that, I'm sorry?
I don't know how to work any of that stuff. I'm
I'll call for a motion of adjournment here.
Move to adjourn.
No, no,
Adjournment?
no,
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 we're just going into
it's
non-public.
You can't
We're not
adjourn, then
adjourning.
it won't be part of the record.
Yeah.
Motion to go into non-public pursuant to RSA,
Well,
91-A:3, 2.
Second.
have to do a roll
All those
call.
in favor say aye.
Have to do a roll call.
Aye.
and
Yes.
Oh, roll call.
No, well, you do
No.
aye and then roll.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Now, when we have